All right, welcome into another episode of the News4JAGs podcast. I'm Jamal St. Cyr alongside Justin Barney. The Jaguars officially back to work. It feels like the season just wrapped up, and somehow they are back in the building.
Man, back in the building, and you got to hear from Trevor Lawrence and Foye Oluokun. And, I mean, draft is just about a week away, and we're going to talk some draft today. It's exciting. I love NFL draft time and just the mock draft season, and it's good to see the Jaguars back at OTAs today. I mean, training game is still a few months away, but it feels like football is back in the air a little bit briefly, but it's back in the air.
A little bit. All right, so we're going to dive into some of the top players at those positions in need. I don't feel like we've really talked maybe enough about some of them in some of our previous episodes. So we'll talk about the top wide receivers, top corners, and maybe if there are any other players that we kind of want to touch on that are those real targets for the Jaguars if they stay at 17, maybe if they moved up a little bit. But before we get to that, with the Jaguars back in the building, there's a whole lot of talk about a whole lot of things. Jaguars have spent some money this offseason, also cleared some cap space. Josh Allen got his deal done, so a lot of people expect that the next guy that is in line to get a deal done is going to be Trevor Lawrence. Trevor going into that fourth season with the team. A lot of quarterbacks get paid before their fourth year. Trevor Lawrence did say that it would be nice if he got paid today, but he did also say that that's not the end-all, be-all goal for him when it comes to getting the job done. He wants to win a Super Bowl, not just get a contract.
There's definitely been some conversations. As far as where that's at now, it's not really my focus. I'd love to obviously be a Jag. So for as long as possible, we love it here, and I love where we're headed as an organization, and feel like I'm just getting better every year, and my best ball is definitely ahead of me. So from that standpoint, obviously, that would be great. But like you said, it's going into my fourth year. It's not like this is necessarily going to be my last season. There's a lot that could happen. So not really my focus right now. At the end of the day, my job isn't going to change whether I get extended or not before this season. My job is to go win games and to be the best I can be for this team so we can have a chance to win a Super Bowl. So even if I get the contract extension, that's still my job, even more so. There's even more expectation and pressure on that. So for me, I have the same focus and the same mindset. I can't lie. Obviously, it would be nice to have that done and, feel good about it. But no, it's not really the focus right now. I know where we're at, I know where we're heading, and I know what I have to do. And, there's some improvements that I have to make going forward.
All right, you heard it from Trevor Lawrence. He wants the deal, but not end all be all.
Yeah, and I think it's good for Jaguars fans to hear what Trevor says. So many times Jacksonville has had players where they didn't want to be here. They did not want to be in Jacksonville. They've gotten their way out of town, or it's just not worked out. I mean, you look at Nick Foles, you look at Jalen Ramsey, you look at Yannick Ngakoue. So it is extremely important for this franchise to kind of be turning that page where people want to be here. And no more important person that wants to be here than your franchise quarterback. You took him number 1 overall. And if you're Trevor Lawrence, you know you're going to get paid. It's just a matter of this offseason, next offseason. I know Jamal was on kind of the leader on this last week or a couple weeks ago when you're talking about Trevor and when he's going to get paid. And when you look at some of these other guys where they've gotten paid at, Justin Herbert got paid on the first or second day of training camp last year. Yep. Joe Burrow got paid the week of the regular season open last year, and that's kind of two of the quarterback comps where you look at a guy like Trevor Lawrence, where you're talking top, Joe Burrow's number 1 overall pick a couple years before Trevor, and then Trevor's the number 1 overall pick back then too. So Justin Herbert in that same Burrow class. Will be interesting to see where Trevor falls in there, because when you look at picking up fifth-year options and such, I was looking at a little bit of this today. You get, quarterbacks or guys you want to pick up and have those fifth-year options.
Sure,
but
imagine.
You look at a guy like a Devontae Smith in that same draft as Trevor Lawrence, and the Philadelphia Eagles just a couple of days ago picked up his fifth-year option and then re-signed him to a 3-year deal. So Devontae's going to play on his fourth year. This is his 4th year, same as Trevor's in his 4th year in the league. He'll play under his 5th-year option next year, and then that new money starts the following season. Right. Justin Herbert's deal, similar to that. He'll play into that 5th-year option this year, and then his new money contract starts. Joe Burrow's contract, on the other hand, Joe Burrow signed signed his contract extension, and the Bengals basically tore up his 5th-year option, say you don't have to play on it, your new contract starts now. So interesting to see which train of thought or where those negotiations will lead with Trevor. But I do think, I'm kind of with you now, I think that Trevor's deal could come maybe in that July window. They got to pick up his option by May 2nd. That's a formality. But I do think that new contract with Trevor could get done by the start of training camp.
I think it will get done before the start of training camp. That's my belief. It's been my belief for a little while. And then also, one thing I will say, though, there's going to be a hard stop on it for Trent Baalke.
Mm-hmm.
Trent does not negotiate. One thing I've never clarified is if he negotiates during training camp, but he does not negotiate during the season. I would imagine that stretches into training camp. So day one of training camp, whether it's July 16th or whatever day it ends up being, I would imagine that's your hard stop. If the deal's not done, they're going to wait and push it down the road and work on it next offseason.
And the reason I know people almost look at say, why you got Trevor got 2 more years on his deal? Why do you want to sign him now? A couple reasons for that, because that NFL salary cap continues to go up and up and up and up. And by that, if you kick the can down the road a year or two down the road for Trevor,
more and more expensive.
And you're looking at a market value that is probably 20% higher than it is today. I mean, look, case in point of Josh Allen. Had you signed Josh Allen last offseason, you're talking, instead of about a $145 million contract, you're probably talking 115, 120 maybe. Right. So you lock Trevor into that deal. He knows your franchise quarterback. Trevor gets paid now. His agents get paid now. Happy about that. You got that long-term security and that guaranteed money, and you kind of lock in before that inflation price hits. And I think that's where you want to look. Yeah, Trevor's had 3 uneven years and stuff, so I get the fans probably saying, oh, why are you doing this now too soon? But I do think Jacksonville can lock in their franchise guy now at a reduced rate. When I say reduced rate, probably $55 million a year is what Trevor's going to get in that ballpark of. So you lock him in now at a reduced rate instead of having to do like Josh Allen and having to pay him a inflated rate 2 years from now.
There's no such thing as a hometown discount, and they always got the money. I do want to circle back to something you said, because I had actually thought about that earlier. You mentioned guys saying they wanted to be here in Jacksonville. And I'd actually asked Foye Oluokun about that earlier, because he mentioned, like, before he was talking about his extension, he said he told his agent he wanted to stay with the Jaguars. He wanted to stay in Jacksonville with coaches that believed in him. And it kind of dawned on me that there's not – I mean, and we've talked about it with the Evan Ingram and Josh Allens when they've said things like that there hasn't been, over the course of Jaguars history, a lot of players, especially players that are top of their position like that, say they want to be a Jaguar. They want to be in Jacksonville.
Right.
And I kind of asked Foye, I just asked him why. I said, look, why do you think that speaks to something? And he said that they have such a collection of guys that have a chip on their shoulder, and with the way last season went, that so many of them feel like they let their brothers down, and they kind of feel like, as a group, they go back and say, I have to make up for that. And you know what? I think there's something to that, that they have a good locker room, that they feel bonded like that, and that sort of collection of, we want to get this right, and we don't want to just get it right. We want to get it right together. And you're seeing that. That's what Doug and Trent are building, and the kind of guys that they've brought into that locker room, that many of them want to get it right, not just get it right somewhere, get it right together in something that they're building, because they were a part of what went wrong, and now they want to be a part of what was right.
Yeah, and I think it's the national narrative on Jacksonville has changed. I mean, just since your time here.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I have been in this position for between 5.5 years. So just in your time here in town, I've been in Jacksonville a little bit longer than Jamal, but just in your time in town, you look back at Jalen Ramsey, Unique Ngakoue, that situation, that combustible time where the losses on the field were happening. You have personnel losses, guys wanting on. I mean, Jalen Ramsey forcing his way out of town. Tom Coughlin, I mean, draws the NFLPA's wrath on, this is just a terrible place to play. NFLPA rebukes free agents who are going to possibly entertain signing with Jacksonville. Tom Coughlin gets fired. And then you actually have guys, Trevor Lawrence. I mean, remember when Trevor was going to be drafted by Jacksonville, and you had national talking heads saying, this shouldn't happen. Trevor should not be forced to play in a place like Jacksonville. That has shifted so much. I mean, Trevor Lawrence, generational quarterback prospect, loves it in Jacksonville. He reiterated that today when we heard from Trevor. He loves it. He and his wife want to be here in Jacksonville. And for a guy like Trevor, a generational guy, number 1 pick in the draft, saying, I want to be in Jacksonville. Foye Oluokun wants to be in Jacksonville. Josh Allen wants to be in Jacksonville. These guys want to be here. When you have franchise guys like that, guys who have been great ambassadors for the community, darn good football players, saying, we want to be here. That's, I mean, you're talking 4 years ago, you had to overpay for guys to get here because Jacksonville was such a toxic, bad place. And I think that the culture has shifted completely.
Flipped completely.
Completely. I mean, just in your time here.
100%. Because, guys were trying to get out. There were things, some of the stuff I remember around that team in 19 when I first got here. And I was like, what's going on? This isn't right. It's completely different now. You heard it from Gabe Davis when we first talked to him after signing. He was like, as soon as the Jaguars called, he was like, done. I wanted to get back to Florida. I wanted to be a Jaguar. And he was through the roof, ecstatic to be a part of the team. And you're seeing guys. Arik Armstead had plenty of other options. Could have gone somewhere else. And he chose to come to Jacksonville and be a part of the Jaguars. So you're seeing a difference. That's the impact that Doug has made as a coach, because he's a coach that guys want to play for.
Right.
And he has that reputation around the league. So before we get into, I guess let's kind of switch gears here a little bit. Part of that is they've done a good job of bringing in the right kind of players. That also goes into the draft. So Trent and Doug have a very particular player personality type kind of guys that they want to bring, that are a part of the culture they're trying to bring or trying to build. And when you think about it, all teams do. You get the bones, you get the core, and the culture here was bad, but it has been fixed. They've kind of flipped that and flipped the roster over the years. So now the culture is in a better place. But you never want to get to a point where you have too many bad eggs.
Right.
You have a culture that can survive a few. So there's a very particular case. So part of I always watch some of the games, and I go through and look at guys and kind of figure out, okay, well, this is him on the field. Part of that is, and since we don't have the luxury of meeting with these guys one-on-one and meeting all of them, I go back and I'll sift through interviews. Like, I've been sitting at my desk just listening to interviews of different guys, like, nonstop. I'll find stuff from during the season just to see how they're interacting after games, during training camp, during the lead up to the combine, because you get a chance to kind of get a glimpse into the personality, a glimpse into kind of who a guy is. You don't get the full picture because, look, it's still just an interview, but you can kind of see the body language. You can kind of see some of those things, some of those traits, and start to get an idea. And let me tell you, if there is a Jaguar guy, Rome Odunze had, like, his entire personality is a Trent Baalke, Doug Peterson guy.
Fred Taylor likes him.
Fred Taylor loves him. He was just on the pivot, and if you haven't watched it, it was a really good interview. But, Rome Odunze is a flat-out personality type that will fit in with what they're trying to build.
I can see where this is going right now. And I like it. I like where Jamal's head's at here.
Look, I'm just saying, I am on the trade-up train. I am on the trade-up train. If the Jaguars are going to do it, just do it.
For an offensive lineman? Or
no, you trade up for Rome.
Okay, I have sold Jamal. I've sold him.
He has sold me on trading up for Rome Odunze.
Perfect.
If he makes it to where
that's
the Jaguars
true. That is true.
Make it to. So we said we were going to talk about some of the top prospects. One of them is Rome Odunze. Problem is Rome's not going to be there at 17.
Right.
If you want Rome, you got to go get Rome. But the question is, where are you going up to? A lot of people are targeting the Falcons at 8. I say the Bears at 9 also should be in the market because they don't have enough draft picks, so getting more draft capital for them would be helpful. But you're going to have to go up and get Rome. But there's also the possibility that Rome's gone. Rome could go 6. He could be gone before the Jaguars really have a chance to strike. Rome's that kind of player. Out of Washington, he's a Western kind of guy because he grew up in Las Vegas. What's funny is, okay, Justin, you'll like this, and I had to look it up to make sure. There was a coach that came to our area, coached at Menendez for a year.
Okay.
Do you remember his name?
Coach Menendez. Oh yeah.
Rodriguez.
Yeah, he played at Bishop Gorman.
And that's where Rome Odunze played. And you know what? I went back and looked up. You know who his high school football coach was?
That's who it was.
That's exactly who it was. It was a very short stint at Menendez.
He did not last past. I think he played coached 2 games.
Yeah,
and he was 1-1, and There was an incident with the athletic director, and he was not welcome back. So I thought that was an odd hire anyway, but that's funny. But I mean, coached at Bishop Gorman. Bishop Gorman's Rome Odunze played out there, one of the best programs in the country annually. So we won't hold that against him.
So I don't think he's going to be calling Coach Rodriguez to get
Probably
any
not.
recommendations about the area.
Sanchez,
that's it. Sanchez, that's it. But yeah, I had to look it up when he said he played at Bishop Gorman. I said, I wonder if those timelines match up. They did.
Was Tate Martell his quarterback?
I don't know. I wonder.
I'm curious.
I do need to look up that part of it, but I just looked up when Rome was in high school and when Coach Sanchez was there coaching, and it was lined up where he was the head coach.
That's
I had to
funny.
go on Max Preps and do a little digging. But he does have a connection that way, at least a very short one. But look, Rome's fantastic. He is that big body receiver. He's a go-up-and-get-it guy, hard-working guy. You get into his background of some of the stuff. I mean, he was talking about, like, his grandfather has 50 kids. So, yeah, so he was one. Yeah, right. So his parents were one of many. But his grandfather had a farm, and he said he remembered, some of the stuff is from the pivot, but watching his grandfather work, and he just realized, like, the work is the work. And I was like, okay. And that was part of the reason he was explaining why at the combine he stayed and kept doing the 3-cone drill over and over and over because he couldn't get the time that he wanted. So he kept doing it. And he was like, look, I'm just locked in like that. I'm competitive, and the work is the work. So, look, I think he has the right personality. I think he would be a home run. The football checks all the boxes.
Right.
I mean, he is a talent. He is going to be good in the league. And him and Trevor Lawrence would be great.
And that you are going to have to go up and
you're going to have to go up and
pay something to get him.
It's
either
what
8,
you're willing to give up.
8 or 9, I think, are kind of the window for him right there. So you got 8 right now. We're thinking that's kind of the Falcons. You know, the Falcons need an edge, maybe too high for the edge. They're going to have trade options there, and then the Bears at 9. You're going to take Caleb Williams at 1, and you could book into that in the top 10 by getting a Rome Odunze type of player, and that's kind of the thought. So you're going to have to get up no lower than 8, and then obviously get in front of the Bears, get the Bears pick at 9. So I think if you could give them that first round pick, and then hopefully hold on to your second, maybe send a third this year, and then maybe a second next year to move up from 17 to 8 or 9. I think that would be great. I think that's kind of a lot of mocks are forecasting something like that, and then barring something crazy. I mean, maybe Marvin Harrison or Malik Neighbors falls, something like. Probably not going to happen, but I would love to see Rome in there. I'm glad Jamal's finally on that bandwagon. Another guy I like is Quenya Mitchell. I don't know if he'll be there at 17 either. You talk about a guy who's got supreme confidence, good makeup. He's had an unbelievable pre-draft run and combine and everything. So I love Rome, and I love Quenya Mitchell if they go the cornerback route.
So if they go the cornerback route, would you trade up for Quenya?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't go up into the top 8 to get him. I would probably go 12 maybe to get him.
Because that's my concern. And that's been my concern for a while with the corners. Like, look, I don't love Quinyon and Terrion Arnold. Like, I don't love them. But I do think both of them are going to be good players. I think I like Quinyon Mitchell a little bit more than Arnold. But I've just been concerned that I don't think they're going to make it to 17.
Agree. I don't think they are.
Maybe Cooper DeJean having a really good pro day not long ago could help, because now all of a sudden he can leap into that conversation for a team like the Colts that needs a corner, or if the Philadelphia Eagles decide to get aggressive and trade up for a guy. But if one of those guys is sliding, teams know the Jaguars need a corner. They're going to try and jump them.
Right.
So that's one of my concerns, is that with the edges being pushed down the board, which we'll see if that actually happens on draft day, is that, I mean, realistically, and I play with a lot of the mock draft simulators, and we're going to do a group mock draft here shortly that'll be on News4JAGs.com. There are quite often where you get on the clock at 17 and both of those guys are gone.
Right.
And you're sitting there looking at the board, and you're like, okay, well, I could reach for a corner, and I can go, like, I like Nate Wiggins. I don't think the Jaguars are going to like Nate Wiggins, right? So there's those kind of corners on the board still. But, okay, what do you do there? So now that's where, like, I've been for a while and that's why we've had the offensive line conversation.
You've made this point a few weeks ago where it was like, okay, if we stay at 17 and we're looking at corner receiver, well, you're going to have your 5th option at receiver, or you're going to have your 4th option at corner, which is, are you comfortable in that
Right.
situation there. And, in these, we talked about before, Brian Thomas is gone. So who's your fifth receiver going to be? Are you
Right.
comfortable with that? I mean, are you comfortable, assuming Terrion and Quinion are gone, are you comfortable with Kool-Aid McKinstry at 17?
Right.
So that's
I'm a big Kool-Aid. I like Kool-Aid because I feel like his floor is so high. You know what you're going to get from him. So I guess we can get into some of the other names. I really like Kool-Aid McKinstry. He's probably after that group because the top corners are Quinion Mitchell,
Yep.
Terrion Arnold from Alabama. He's also if you haven't watched a Terrion Arnold interview, he is a hoot. If the Jaguars drafted him, the media would have a field day with this guy because he would just hold clinics on stuff. But those are the top two corners in the draft. I think there's a realistic chance that one of them could slide, but I also think there's a very good chance that neither one of them's there. And it wouldn't surprise me if the Jaguars got on the clock at 17 and poof, both guys are gone. After that, you get into the conversation about like Cooper DeJean. There's a lot of people that love Cooper DeJean. Really good player. I don't know if he fits in what Ryan Nielsen likes to do. He does his best kind of football when he has his eyes on the quarterback playing in zone. If he goes to Indianapolis in that Gus Bradley defense, that's a perfect fit for him.
Yeah, and Ryan Nielsen, remember, if you follow it, I mean, he's going to run a scheme probably 75 to 85% man coverage.
Right.
So, again, a situation that was played here years ago under the Doug Marrone / Gus Bradley regimes.
Yep.
Those kind of guys, the Todd Washes, where you had that zone defense. And, those elite corners hate playing zone. They feel like man gives them the best opportunity to showcase their skills, and you think you can win those matchups so often instead of playing in a zone in that defense. And Ryan Nielsen's defense really kind of emphasizes that man coverage, and you don't have a lot of man coverage talent on Jacksonville right now.
Right. So they have to add a corner at some point in the draft, a corner that has that skill set, even if it's just for depth, even if it's a guy that's not going to start. You have to build that depth up, and the Jaguars have been trying to for the past couple of years. They've been taking swings late.
Right.
They're going to have to take an earlier swing. So after you kind of get past those three, you start falling into the Nate Wiggins. Wiggins is a fantastic cover guy. Has all the man coverage skills in the world. He's a little lighter. He's like 180.
A little small, too. 5'8", 5'9".
No, he's a little taller than that.
You told me? I thought he was 5'9".
I think he's taller than that. But he doesn't tackle well. They're going to want a physical corner that's going to come up and tackle. And if you watched what made the Kansas City defense so ferocious, their corners came up and tackled. So on the edges, Tyson Campbell will come up and hit. They're going to want another corner that's going to come up and hit. Will Nate Wiggins do that? You're taking a gamble then.
Right.
So, and once you get past that, you're at Kool-Aid McKinstry. So, and then you're starting to slip into the guys that are kind of second roundish grade after you get past Kool-Aid. So, corner's an interesting one, and it's like, okay, what do you do if you're sitting there at 17? You don't want to force the pick because there are some decent corners that could slide. I love TJ Tampa from Iowa State. Love TJ Tampa. And his last name's Tampa. Bring the boy to Florida. I mean, come on now. So there are other corners, Kyrie Jackson, Renardo Green from Florida State. There are guys that you can get later in the draft that I think can have space to grow. But I don't want to but I'm also not a believer in just forcing a pick, period.
Right. And that's why I think you get yourself in trouble if you draft for need as opposed to best player available because, again, you have a tendency to reach in a situation like that, and I think you have to lean best player available or trade back in that situation because, if the best player available is a guard at that point, you probably can trade back in that situation and add, accumulate picks because that's not necessarily a position of great value there. But I do think Jacksonville, you've got to be able to fill some holes in this draft. Not necessarily, if you need a receiver and there's not one there at 17, okay, there's a corner at 17, take that corner because that obviously feels. But I do think you have to come out of this draft with a competent receiver that can get into that mix. Again, right now, all of Jacksonville's receivers are imported guys through free agency, and that's not sustainable long term. So I think you need to address receiver at some point in the draft.
Yeah.
Whether that's trading up for Rome, whether that's getting a Keon Coleman type in the second round, whether it's looking at somebody in the third round. Looking at whomever fits that Jaguars draft pattern. You've got to come away with a receiver. I think you've got to come away with a defensive lineman, an edge rush kind of help, and I think you've got to come away with corner and some offensive line reinforcements. Now, wherever they line up in the drafts, that remains to be seen, but I think you've got to come out of this draft with impact players and at least 2 starters.
So let's talk about the receivers a little bit. So, yes, they do have to get receiver help. If you miss out on the top 3, which are Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, and Rome Odunze, which, again, you have to trade up to get one of those. So if you're sitting at 17, it looks like the Brian Thomas Jr. train has slowed down a little bit.
Although I did see him mocked to the Jags in an ESPN draft.
Right. So I meant slowed down as far as him getting past the Jags. So he might be there at 17. So you have a pretty good shot at having Brian Thomas Jr., Adonai Mitchell both on the board, which are probably your next 2, you could debate left and right on who's 4 and 5. Both of them have been mocked. I know it seems like Adonai Mitchell has been more of a fan favorite, at least for Jaguars fans. A lot of them online like him a little bit more. I like Adonai Mitchell better than Brian Thomas Jr., but I do think Brian Thomas Jr. is going to have a long NFL career. I just don't know. I don't know if I'm in love with either one of those at 17.
Yeah, I don't think so. I could talk myself into either of those guys.
Yeah. But I feel like both of those are potential swings. Like, I loved Adonai Mitchell before he had the combine and his stock shot through the roof. When people were talking about him in the 2nd round, loved it. That was my guy. He was on my guys list. But now I've kind of because now the price has gone up.
Right.
And I'm like, that's a little pricey for me. I don't
what
know.
What about a Worthy at 17? Is he in that same chasm?
Xavier Worthy, I just think he's a little too small.
Yeah,
I worry about him staying healthy. It's like Tank Dell was fantastic last year, and then the size caught up with him. Xavier Worthy's kind of in that category where he looks like a track star. Is he going to be able to stay healthy? I think when he's on the field, he plays football. He's not like a track guy. I think he'll be good. My question mark is, can he stay healthy? I don't know if I think 17's a little pricey for him.
A little rich for him?
Yeah, like if you're talking to me about like if the Jaguars traded back, I can get on board for any of those 3. If you were talking about one of them falling to 48, now we're really talking. But outside of that, I don't know. I mean, I think I've kind of started to sell myself more on address the receiver in the 2nd round. Go for a Keon Coleman. Keon reminds me just a little bit after the catch of what Allen Robinson was, like a bigger guy who has enough wiggle to get past folks. Or you hope Ladd McConkey slides.
Yeah, and I think it needs to be said, Jacksonville's draft history at receiver in the 1st round has been absolutely embarrassing. Now, had Justin Blackmon held on and he had his off-the-field demons, and that ended up derailing his career, but he was poised for that greatness. But Jacksonville's 1st-round receiver history, you got guys like Matt Jones, R.J. Soward, Justin Blackmon, not really good guys. And you look past, their best receiver draft pick has been Allen Robinson, and he was a later round pick. He was a fantastic draft pick and ended up seeing his best years outside of Jacksonville, but he had an unbelievable season in Jacksonville and then ended up getting injured. I think he 1,400-yard receiving season in Jacksonville. DJ Chark was a 2nd-round receiver. Marquise Lee was a 2nd-round receiver, ended up not having the best career here in Jacksonville due to injuries. But again, there are value picks at receiver beyond the 1st round. So if Jacksonville ends up getting a corner, offensive lineman, something like that in the 1st round, you gotta say, receiver. This is an exceptional draft if you need a receiver. They have got some very good guys who are not going in round 1. Yeah. And Jacksonville's had its most success in picking receivers beyond the 1st round.
So if it's not receiver or it's not corner, which there's a possibility. We've talked about some of the edge guys. I'm a Latu guy. He's a pass rusher through and through. There's also Dallas Turner and Jared Verse. Jared Verse more of a traditional defensive end, 4-3 defensive end. Dallas
Although
Turner's
I know your Latu love. I did see it pay off in the ESPN mock draft today. I believe he went 12th to the Broncos in today's draft on ESPN.
He is the best pass rusher in this draft. If the medicals weren't a question mark, this dude would be locked in the top 10. He is the best pass rusher in this draft. And then you listen to him talk. You listen to him talk. He understands pass rush plan, counter punches, Like he almost sounds like a boxer. Like punch, counter punch. The way he can talk about pass rush moves. That dude, he's good. He is fantastic. I don't think he's going to be in Jacksonville. I just don't. I'd be surprised anyway. But I think he is going to be a very good NFL player. Edge would be surprising to me.
Do you? I mean, hear me out. Do you kick the tires on him at 17 to address that pass rush if he's there?
Oh, I would.
I knew it. I knew I'd get.
If the board falls weird, and it always does.
It always does.
If the board fell weird, I would 100% kick the tires on Laiatu Latu. Look, everybody wants to talk about C.J. Stroud C.J. Stroud that. How do you stop C.J. Stroud? Sack him. If it's third down and you're rolling out there with Eric Armstead, Trayvon Walker, Josh Allen, and Laiatu Latu, C.J. Stroud going to have problems.
Mm-hmm.
Good luck blocking that. I don't care where they're at. And Josh Allen talked about Ryan Nielsen wanting to kick him inside to like 3-tech and stuff like that on some passing downs. Great. Put Laiatu Latu on the edge. It is a perfect world. All of a sudden, it is a fierce pass rush with all kinds of problems.
I knew I would get Jamal hyped up about that. When I saw that draft this morning, I'm like, I'm bringing that up to Jamal next time. Because that's really the first mock draft in this time where I've seen Laiatu creeping up to that top 10, and
it's the medicals.
I think it's a possibility he could be there at 17. And again, if he's the best player on your board, I brought this up a while ago. Jacksonville drafted a guy with medical concerns from UCLA before, and Miles Jack in the second round, and that panned out pretty well for Jacksonville. So I don't think pass rusher is off the board at all.
Shouldn't be.
In the first round. I mean, I think there's some talented pass rushers, and we saw Josh Allen's tweet last week. You've seen it historically before. Build both of those lines. Build both of those guys up front and down low, and that's how you win football games.
Now, there are some defensive tackles that can give you some pass rush help, too. Johnny Newton, Byron Murphy. Those are the two. Both of them will go in the first round. Byron Murphy's from Texas. He's the smaller of the two Texas defensive tackles in this year's draft. And Johnny Newton's from Illinois. Both of them got some pass rush juice now. It's dealer's choice on which way you want to go. Both of them are fantastic, give you a whole lot of wiggle. I think Byron Murphy probably a little bit better fit for what the Jaguars want to do. I don't know. It's tough to divide the two of them. They're really close. Teams are going to have them really close on their boards. Both of them probably are on the board at 17.
Yep.
So, look, there's options there where you can get some pass rush juice from a defensive tackle as well. On the offensive line side of things.
All right.
Offensive line side of things. The offensive line is actually going to be interesting because a lot of the mock drafts are starting. Once you get to this point, the mock drafts start to kind of consolidate.
Yep.
So you start to get an idea. Some of them have Troy Fatanu going higher, the guy from Washington.
Mm-hmm.
He gives you a little bit of versatility. He's been a left tackle, but he could also play guard, going higher than the Jaguars, which would help because that pushes somebody else down.
Right.
Some of them have him on the board. The guy who's really sliding is Talisa Fuanga from Oregon State.
Right.
It seems like a lot of people are buying into more that he's going to be pigeonholed as a guard, maybe a right tackle. Really good guard, probably a good right tackle. So he's sliding down boards a little bit. He could be there, and he's a guy that I think would be hard to pass up on. Problem is, you draft him at 17, you're either committing to benching somebody, shuffling your line drastically, or you got a guy that you drafted in the first round that's not going to see the field if everybody stays healthy.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you got Ezra Cleveland at left guard. You got Brandon Sheriff at right guard, Anton and Cam at the tackles, and then Mitch Morse at center. So, I mean, where are you going to push him in? And I know you like to look long term, especially with the Cam situation coming up. But if you're drafting a guy at 17 on a team that has, quote unquote, AFC South and playoff aspirations, I don't think you can afford to draft a guy and have him redshirt a year in a sense. I think you really need to. And, last year we would have been perfect because you had all the injuries and attrition on the offensive line. Right. But I think at 17, but again, if Fuaga's your best prospect on the board at 17, you take him and let the chips fall where they may. And injury situation last year proved that you can never have too much depth at offensive line. And you got Cam. I mean, he's basically his last year here possibly. Mm-hmm. So I don't think, I was adamantly against offensive line early in this process. But again, if a guy, Fuaga drops and Alt drops, I mean, something like that happens, then I do think, those guys best on your board, you invest in them. Again, I mean, you brought up this point last year that, Cam is basically a one-year deal. He's going after this year. What does Anton do? Does he stay at right? Does he move to left next year? So
Anton's it right now for next season under contract. Cam and Walker, both free agents after this year.
Yep.
So that's the thing. Like, offensive line's not going to get a party from fans, but the offensive linemen never do.
Never do.
The only time you hear about offensive line is when the offensive line's not good and the quarterback's getting beat up.
Right.
But outside of that, first-round pick on an offensive line is never one that, like, people aren't out buying jerseys. It's not going to spice things up. It's not making a splash. But if the guy's good, then all of a sudden people appreciate it.
Yeah, I remember when Tony Baselli was picked and sitting in front of the TV and watching it and like, offensive lineman, really? I mean, Kajana Carter in this draft and Kerry Collins and Rashawn Salam and all these guys. And you go with Tony Baselli, it worked out all right.
Yeah, that worked out all right. He got a gold jacket, so I'd say it worked out all right. So the Jaguars should have some options. There's going to be a good player on the board if they sit at 17. The question is just where and how that impacts the rest of the draft. So, I mean, it's tough if you stray. Like, let's say, sake of conversation, they go Byron Murphy or Johnny Newton right there at 17. So now you spent a first-round pick on a trench guy defensive tackle. Now you still got to get a corner.
Mm-hmm.
You still got to get a receiver. What order do you do it, and what's on the board in the second round?
That's true. They have issues, and I do think Jacksonville will pick best player available. I remember last year at the pre-draft luncheon, Trent Baalke said they removed guys off their board for character issues, how big that was. So, where do you balance that too with character issues and style fit and everything? And Jacksonville's done so good at rebuilding the culture here in town. And again, I think if you find the culture fit and it's the best player, truly the best player available, I think that's what you do. And whether that's, whether that's defensive tackle, whether that's an edge guy, whether that's an offensive tackle, I think you stick to that philosophy and do that. I would love, though, like we started this off, I would love to see them say, hey, we're getting to number 8. We're gonna get our guy at number 8. I think Rome is the pick for me. Yeah. I would love to see that happen. I like that you finally came around.
Rome would be a home run. Problem is with trading, you got to have a partner. Somebody has to want to do the deal with you. Is there going to be a team in the top 10 that's willing to move down without getting a king's ransom?
Yeah, that could be the Chargers, could be the Bears, could be the Falcons.
Well, it could be. It could be. I really think Jim Harbaugh he'll think about it, but I also think he understands that he has to refill the cupboard.
Mm-hmm.
And he has an opportunity to either get a really good offensive lineman or a really good wide receiver to fill the cupboard because that team needs a talent infusion. I don't know if he's going to want to move back. The Falcons are an interesting one, but another team with a first-year head coach, a second-time head coach also, that understands the need for top-end talent.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not so sure that they're not going to want to get Raheem Morris a piece to try and make – because the GM's been there longer than Raheem Morris.
Right.
GMs don't survive multiple coaches very often because he was there with Arthur Smith too. So it's very rare. So if Raheem don't work, the GM looking for a job too.
I remember Trent a couple years ago specifically saying –
he said it.
In the pre-draft luncheon from a couple years ago. He said, hey, if this pick doesn't work out, I'm not going to be making the next one.
That's it.
I'm not going to be making the next one.
That's it. So, so that's very clear. So, the Falcons maybe are in a spot. I think the Bears, because they only have 4 picks and they'll have already picked, are in the spot where they're going to say, okay, we can get a couple of picks back. If you'll give us another draft pick this year so that way we can go up from 4, we can turn 1 pick into 2 to grow that rookie class, they'll be interested. But, some of those coaches, I think they're going to be looking at this draft, say this is a good draft, let's get the high-end guy on our board. But we'll see. We'll see what Trent's willing to give up. Trent doesn't have a history of being an aggressive guy to trade up. He's more of a trade-back kind of guy.
Yeah.
So,
speaking of bad receivers, I remember the other one, Reggie Williams, and in that draft, Jacksonville, I think, was at 7, 8, 9, and it was like a 6-player draft. And I'm like, Buddy Hayes, Carlin, and I were watching that draft, and there was just this run on receivers. and they reached for Reggie Williams, another Washington receiver who was terrible in Jacksonville. Just did not have what it took, but it was like Jacksonville was just out of that reach of those elites. And right now at 17, they're just out of the elite reach at 17. So you need to get up into that top 10, and to get that Rome Odunze type, let's hope he works out better than the last Washington receiver.
Those 7, 8, 9, and 9 win seasons are like purgatory.
Yes.
They're normally just good enough where you're not going to get the elite player in the draft, and they're just bad enough where a lot of times you're on the outside of the playoffs and looking in. And that's what the Jaguars had, and now they're sitting smack dab in the middle of the draft, and you're hoping that some team like the Jaguars got Josh Allen because the Raiders at the time reached on a player that they didn't think fit. You hope that some other team makes a bad decision, reaches on a player. Somebody falls in love with Nate Wiggins.
Well, I mean, you saw last year with Bijan Robinson.
Yes.
Or, I mean, the Jahmyr Gibbs, right? The Detroit reached for him. Not Bijan, but Jahmyr Gibbs at 12, right? He was in that
early. It was really
way early, and he was projected, latter half of that first round.
I mean,
that always
he's good, but
he's good. But everybody was like, "This is just an absolute reach pick, running back this high." Worked out well for him, but there's always one of those picks. And to me, I think you get 4 or 5 quarterbacks, you have that one reach pick, and then all of a sudden, maybe 17 isn't looking so bad.
Right. So you hope for something like that, and you hope as many quarterbacks go before him as possible. You hope somehow that the Vikings and the Broncos say, got to get the quarterback now, Michael Penix, Bo Nix, whoever it is, and get all those quarterbacks off the board. At 5, maybe 6 quarterbacks go before the Jaguars at 17, they'll be sitting pretty. We'll see what happens. Draft's right around the corner. I don't know how many more podcasts we'll be able to squeeze in before draft day, but we'll have plenty of coverage on draft day over on News4JAGs. Make sure you come hang out with us as we get you caught up with everything before the Jaguars do get on the clock. And we'll see you next time here on News4JAGs podcast.